Hey, this is episode number 38 of Gen X Amplified, and I am excited about this chat with STEM advocate and social capital educator, Alicia Morgan, where we have a great conversation about Gen X leadership and the importance of discovering and telling your unique story. This is a really good one. So, are you ready? Let's do it.
So I just wanted to have something positive in the universe for Gen Xers, and I was like, whether one or two people read it, that so be it. But I just wanted to be a part of that positive conversation.
Welcome to Gen X Amplified, where we bring you inspirational and entertaining conversations with successful Gen X leaders and entrepreneurs.
This is the show created just for you. The powerful generation between the boomers and millennials to help you amplify your story,
Maximize your impact,
and become Gen Exceptional in business and in life.
Now, here's your host, Adrion Porter.
Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Gen X Amplified. This is Adrion Porter, and this is the podcast to help and inspire you, the sometimes overlooked, but very powerful and influential generation, to help you unlock your power and maximize your impact at work, in business, and in life. And as always, I want to thank you for listening and for your download. I have the pleasure of welcoming my guest today, who is a TEDx speaker, an author, a STEM advocate, that's science, technology, engineering, and math. She is currently the Vice President of Education and Programs at the Frontiers of Flight Museum, which is located in Dallas, Texas. Go Cowboys! Where she is responsible for managing the development and execution of school and public programs through STEM outreach activities, aviation, and spaceflight history exploration. Wow. Now, she is a graduate of Tuskegee University with a Bachelor of Science degree in Aerospace Science Engineering and New Mexico State University with a master's degree in Industrial Engineering. So in other words, she is very smart. But what's also pretty awesome is that she is committed to lifelong learning and is also passionate about helping people learn that there is life after failure by taking corrective action for business success. So everyone, I am really, really honored and excited to welcome my Gen Exceptional guest, Alicia Morgan. Alicia, what is going on?
Well, thank you, Adrian. I am so excited about being here in this platform, and with a lot's going on. So you talked about life after failure. If you would have talked to me about 5 years ago or even earlier in my life when I was like going to STEM programs, I would have never told you I was going to be a leader of anything. Your intro didn't mention is that I am a strong introvert. I am a very analytical person. So I liked being behind the scene. I was always a writer. What's interesting is that my high school graduation, I was the class speaker. And the only thing I remember about that was quoting Frederick Douglass. The only way to succeed is to override the obstacles in your way. And I've had many obstacles, many unconventional ways of landing in success. And it's interesting that people saw something in me very early on. They were like, go out and lead. And I was like, no, I don't really want to do that. I'm so comfortable behind the scenes, making things happen. And everything kind of fell apart. I was in engineering for about 13 years. Okay. And in the background, I always knew that I marched to the beat of my own drum. You can thank my parents for that when I was growing up. You talk about brands. So I remember I wanted these Nike tennis shoes really bad, and I kept staring at it. I was with my dad, and he was like, if you keep staring at those shoes, if you need things to define you, you're going to have a hard life. But we all know he was really trying to be cheap and didn't want to buy me the shoes. But there was a lesson in that, and I took that and ran with it. And throughout my career, I'm not always going to walk into the room to being the loudest in the room, but to have that quiet confidence and find that thing that makes you stand out is essentially what you have to do. You don't have to be like everybody else. If you find whatever makes you unique and keep growing and building upon that, that actually puts you well ahead, regardless of what generation you're in.
That is very true. And I'm so glad you touched on some of those past key milestones in your life. And I want to make sure that I got that Frederick Douglass quote. What was it again?
the only way to succeed is to override the obstacles in your way. I'm probably paraphrasing it, but that's basically what it says.
That is a great quote. And I'm glad you dug right into some of your background, because that's really important. And I like to say for this audience, and even for my own personal selfish benefit, because I love talking to individuals like yourself, I think it's really empowering for listeners to hear from thought leaders that come on this show about their journey, because we definitely want to talk about what you have going on now. But I think it's really important for people to hear about the transformational moments and the road that led you to become who you are. So you had mentioned certain parts of your background. You mentioned that you are an introvert, which there are a lot of us that are introverts. Actually, I'm really an introvert, because I think introvert, from my understanding, it's the way you are that gives you energy,
yes.
where you get your energy from, not necessarily
yes.
whether you're shy or talkative. And
right.
So can you just talk about a little bit of, are you from the Texas area? Where are you actually from? Like, where were you born, as far as like, where were you raised, and where actually are you from?
It's going to be funny because I was born and raised in New Orleans, and no, I don't have the accent. And so I was born and raised in New Orleans, and then I went to Tuskegee, of course, because Tuskegee was I went to go to a HBCU, Historically Black College and University, and yep. Tuskegee was the only historically Black college with an aerospace program. It actually still is in one of the top universities in aerospace in general overall. Mm-hmm. So I went to Tuskegee, and then I moved to Seattle, Washington, and I worked at Boeing at the time. And what's interesting about this story, they talk about leaders, and there's some book that goes around and you should never eat alone. Well, when I first got out of college, I used to go to lunch, and as an introvert, drawing energy, I was like, okay, this is my only time that I can sit by myself. Well, there was this vice president that would sit with me every day during lunch, and I couldn't figure out why he's sitting with me, and he's imparting this knowledge on me. He said, I used to be an entrepreneur, then I came back into corporate and to build some more relationships, and what he was talking about relationships was social capital. I had no idea what that meant. Like I said, I was an introvert. I'm going to go to work, and I'm going to work very hard. Someone's going to notice and promote me. That's not really how it works. I had no idea how it worked. But in hindsight, and even when I interned, again, there was another vice president my dad knew who advocated for me to get an internship. So there was these people all on my journey that were imparting this knowledge on me. And as I work with managing millennials and work with baby boomers, it's absolutely what set me on this path, because I know the value of the baby boomer generation and working with millennials. I know I want to stand out and be on my own and march to my own beat of my own drum, and just meshing all those perspectives together is helped me really work well with all those generations and understanding the challenges that come through that. So it was absolutely people along the way that were leaders that were taking me, and they were informal mentors, not always formal mentors. Of course, I have formal mentors now, but each of them just telling me that, essentially sharing their failures with me. It's interesting that I would do a TEDx talk about failures, but they were, telling me that the journey is not a straight line. As much as we want it to be, as much as we think we can prepare, there's outside factors that come into play, and we really, even if you're an overachiever, it's hard. I used to say failure is not an option. Of course, I have humbly found out that it is an option. And what you do after it is, the transformation that happens. I
want to quickly just unpack what you just said, because failure, you're right. You hear that truism a lot, but people call it a truism. And I've even used it in the past many times. Failure is not an option. And I tell myself that, but this is the first time I've heard someone actually embrace failure as an option, but you just didn't embrace it. You said something right afterward. You said it's what you do after the failure is what matters. And it's basically, you're saying that there are times when you will fail. We're not perfect. Yes. I love that statement. And I think that was very telling for you to say that.
Yep. It's we want to talk about, leaders and exceptional people that, but you don't know their backstory. I mean, I know that people I don't want to share failure as a sign of weakness. And as I was going along the way, what helped me the most, as much as I studied, did professional development, took business coaching, what helped me the most were meeting leaders who admitted that they failed and what they did after, because for me, it was confirmation, I'm not alone. When you fail, you absolutely feel like, oh, this is just me. This is just my my lack of capabilities. And, that's whole thing in education. They talk about the fixed versus growth mindset. You feel like this fixed way of things, and I can't grow, I can't do something different, and I don't have this capabilities. But it's just, pushing through that failure and learning how to improve. That's the bottom line.
Well, I definitely assume you had to push through a lot of, I don't want to call them failures, but I'm sure that there were failures in your journey, because just thinking about the track that you took with respect to your education and your field of study, I mean, it's pretty deep. You're talking about aerospace engineering, which again, I kind of joked in the intro that you must be pretty smart, and I applaud you. I'm assuming math, all of the STEM subjects, science and math, specifically in engineering. Let's talk a little bit about you as that 6-year-old girl that was playing possibly with your Barbie dream house or with your numbers and graphs. Like, how early on, Alicia, did you know that you really love numbers? You really love the sciences? Did a teacher kind of empower you and open the door for you to really embrace that part of your skill set?
Well, so it's multi-layers to this. I'll start. So my parents actually, none of them are like in math and science. I have a cousin that's a chemical engineer, but my parents would forced me to read almost anything. And I'm talking, Adrian, not only just read, they would bring a book and say, in a certain amount of days or hours, you're going to come back and tell me what that book was all about. So they were basically teaching me how to break things down and see how things were related. And so anytime I would get a toy or something, I don't want to read the instructions. Let me try to put it together on my own. So that, and then they put me in like science and engineering after school programs, anything to like spark my curiosity, that they were always doing it. So my parents, I think the greatest gift they ever gave to me, in which for me to cross sectors, go from corporate to engineering to nonprofit and feel like I can confidently do it. They never told me what I couldn't do. What they always said, it was like, okay, Alicia, you want to do that. You need to figure out what you're up against. Not necessarily to compare yourself with everybody, but you see what's out there and then, figure out what skills you need and then figure out how to set yourself apart. So that's absolutely what I was always doing. I mean, even I struggled in pre-calculus in high school.
Okay.
The mid-semester before I was spring, I almost failed calculus. And there was a teacher that told me that, you're just going to fail. You need to give it up. And I was like, wow, okay. And I found a tutor. And if you think about my career trajectory, there was always someone telling me, well, you can't do that. I mean, when I switched from the corporate sector to the nonprofit sector and wanted to do all these things, it was like, you're not going to be able to eat. There's no way you can do that.
Right. It
can't be done. And like I said, you can't be done until you do it. And I absolutely, I would like to say that everything builds on everything. One of my mentors said you figure out your 5 successes and failures and what they have in common. And for me, processes and programming was whether I was helping to manage projects or doing process improvements throughout my career and even my current job, that's always what I've been doing. So whether I'm succeeding or failure is something to have to do with creating a program or a process or looking for improvement. And so I absolutely know that was my skill sets. And on top of that, I loved writing. So in my high school yearbook, I didn't even have a plan for my master's degree. It said aerospace engineer and writer. And in many ways, I'm still, both of those things. So it was just being an environment where I was never taught what I couldn't do is just like understand what you're up against. And so when I'm trying something different and they're like, well, this person has this resume and they did that. I was like, okay, I see the skills. And when I walked into trying for this vice president job, when I read the description, I said, okay. I said, they probably will find someone that has more years of experience in the nonprofit sector. Okay. I'm sure of that.
Okay.
I said, but what they won't find is someone that's an aerospace engineer, has experience in corporate and nonprofits. I knew I had 3 wins, and that combination they were not going to find. So when I walked into the interview, I absolutely knew that I had that to leverage in ultimately getting the position, even that my predecessor had a background in engineering, but did not have an aerospace degree.
Right.
So I knew I had those distinguishers, and what's interesting about building relationships. So I was very early in my career, very tactical in my decision making, and I didn't understand strategy. So everything I knew, I had heard one of your other interviews with Paul, and you're talking about everything builds on everything else.
Paul C. Brunson, yes.
Brunson, yes.
Yes.
And what I know is, so when I left, the last job I did in corporate had to do with capital asset management. So that's strategic planning. And a lot of things I do as vice president has to do with strategic planning. So when I left corporate, I actually had another failure. So when I did nonprofit management certification, and when you go from corporate to nonprofits are just like a startup. You're doing everything. You're very spontaneous. It's not as structured. So it took me a while to adjust to that. So the first job I walked in, they wanted me to go and hit the ground running. It was so fast paced. And I knew within 2 months or 2 weeks that it wasn't a good fit. I didn't last 90 days until I got fired. But it was a blessing because when I was taking courses for nonprofit management certification, I met someone who was a new CEO. So I called that person the day I got fired. So I got fired on a Friday. On a Monday, I had a new job. And that's what I always try to tell ambitious millennials when they focus only on their skills, like focus on social capital and relationships as well. Because, by any means, if someone gets fired on a Friday, they don't usually have a new job or a new opportunity by Monday without having good relationships. So that's one of the things that I didn't focus on earlier in my career. And we talked about earlier about the K through 12 education award. So in the background of all this, I was also on my first nonprofit board, and there was an HR director I was under that was executive director. So I learned a lot about navigating through people skills, and it was a youth program. And then there was a high school engineering academy. So if you're not a teacher, or if you don't have a PhD, it's kind of hard to work your way through education. So by being on that board of a high school and relationships, again, it was a former coworker when I got laid off in corporate who said, hey, I got invited to be on this board. You should come along. So I went, and they were looking for a board chair. I volunteered. And then, you know how you volunteer for something, you're like, oh, wait, I really don't know what I'm doing yet. So what am I going to do here? So professional organizations are a great way to transition into multiple sectors. So I was a part of the National Society of Black Engineers, and I was like, okay, I need an executive mentor. And in particular, in navigating in STEM, you have women of color. I was like, I need an African-American male mentor, executive level in STEM. And I wrote it down, and I was like, I really don't know how I'm going to accomplish this. But a few days later, the NSBE sent out an email about a new mentoring program. Well, I looked and the list, and what do you know, the executive director was listed. And so I'm like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? What am I going to say? So I was like, okay, I have a time to write it down. I know how to write well. So I reached out to him, and he ultimately became my mentor, still is my mentor. So that is another way. So building these relationships with these people who can help you see what's on the other side. A lot of times we can get so focused on, I have these awesome set of skills. I'm great. That's all I need to succeed. But you don't know what's down the road, and that person can help you navigate through that. And you shouldn't look at it as, this generation, and even cross generations, learning from a millennial. There have absolutely been opportunities that I've had because of a millennial may have advocated for me, and I have advocated for them, or baby boomer and all that. So I always feel like people have personal experiences that can empower you. You just have to be willing to listen to them.
Wow. And I have been willing to listen to you. You dropped so many nuggets right there. There were a lot of lessons that you just literally went through with respect to social capital and the importance of that, learning the virtues of each generation. I mean, let me just take a step back quickly. I heard a common thread through your story from pivoting from the corporate sector to nonprofit, the mentorship, your parents' greatest gift. You said your parents gave you, I think there were 3 to 4 pillars, and never told you what you couldn't do. Always understand what you're up against, figure out what skills you need, and figure out what sets you apart. If I understand, those are really very important principles that I can definitely see how it propelled you, Alicia, to really just face all of your adversities head on. And also, I believe you said a mentor said to you, look at your 5 successes and your 5 failures and then see what they have in common. I love that. I mean, I think that's something that a lot of people can take to heart. And you acknowledging, Alicia, that you are an introvert, but yet you still found ways to align yourself with key leaders and mentors to help shepherd your trajectory. And something you said specifically about when you were looking for a mentor, you said you specifically wanted an African-American male. I'm curious to know why you wanted to have a male mentor as opposed to someone that shares your same gender.
Well, I have had a lot of female influences, and I just wanted to understand the other side, the other perspective. And I have mentors of all, races, but I just like to understand the African-American male point of view versus me thinking I know versus hearing it is different.
Right.
Like I can read a book or actually get that experience. Or like you can say, some people say, well, I understand all the generations.
Right.
Well, until you've worked with the generations to understand the concerns,
right.
The common thread, everybody wants to be appreciated at the end of the day. So I knew that if I'm going to go and say I'm advocating for, all students, like being on that board of that high school. So it's a multicultural high school. I worked at a nonprofit called Heart House. So it was multicultural refugees from around the world. So I have a real perspective. At the end of the day, we have, people are struggling with assimilation versus acculturation. Can I absolutely be myself, still thrive, still learn? Do I have to lose myself to be successful? Those are common questions, no matter what race or gender there are people asking themselves. So I knew that was a perspective that I was missing. Mm-hmm. And so that's why, in particular, I reached out to that. I wanted to understand, right? Be able to understand it from a place of authenticity. I mean, there's nothing worse when you see someone on a panel or a workshop or discussion, and you can tell they're not being authentic, or they're speaking from a place of they read something or they casually know it's like surface level.
Right.
So I wanted to make sure that I really understood it.
That's really great. You mentioned a book earlier, I believe, Never Eat Alone by Keith Ferrazzi. I think that's the book that you had referenced that talked about the power of social capital. That's actually a really great book. I want to really get into the article that alerted me to you about Gen X. But right before we do that, you had the great experience of speaking at a TEDx event. Called, I think your title of the speech was Get Over It and Get On With It. So I got a chance to watch the video after I found the article. And I must say, I loved your speech. What I really love also, because I'm a music junkie. And I love, Alicia, that you opened it up with a song. You were singing.
You know what?
It's a story about your grandmother.
Classes, and I really, sometimes I just try to interject it, but I would never record a CD. So yeah, I probably go in and out. But I knew that in order to get the full intensity of the story, I would have to sing it. And it's interesting we're talking about generations because it starts talking about how my grandmother told me one day you're going to fail.
Yes.
One day things are going to fall apart. And you're like, well, that's just your generation. If she was alive today, I would like, all right, Grandma, I'm going to sit here. Tell me what else I need to know.
No, I love that because obviously, so you opened up the talk with a very emotional, visceral story. I mean, it painted pictures, everyone can relate to that grandma and the songs that she would sing. And it really brought it home for me. And so I really love you did that. And I know that speaking at a TEDx event is not an easy task. And I'm sure a lot of our listeners some of them are probably interested in speaking at TED. So just quickly, how long did it take for you to prepare for that speech? And do you feel that the experience was worth it?
All right. So the theme around TEDx are ideas worth sharing. So I actually had tried 7 times to get a TEDx speech. Okay. And the 8th time I did. The difference was, again, we're talking about branding and finding a unique story.
Right.
So I had taken some business coaching classes, and the coach said, you need to tell your story of overcoming failure or overcoming pain. And right before all of that, last year, actually, there was this person who said to me that, you're mid-career, your story is not marketable. So again, going back to my parents, I was like, okay, all right, what can I do uniquely? So the movie Hidden Figures came out. And interesting enough, one of the main persons that they talk about in the movie is Mary Jackson. It has her background was in aerospace engineering. So I was like, wow, This is someone I can identify with, have the same background. So I decided to write about my personal perspective as an aerospace engineer and how I enjoy the movie and relate it to the movie. So I took that and I wrote an article and put it on LinkedIn. Then I hashtag it with, I put Alicia Morgan as my hashtag, and then I put Hidden Figures. Mm-hmm. Interesting enough, I posted that article on Twitter. So a journalist from Dallas Morning News did a search. And she did a search and she said, what I did was I put Dallas and I put Hidden Figures, and you were the only one who showed up with a personal story about it. She reached out to me. And then the arts and life section of Dallas Morning News, I got my first feature story from that. And so I realized then that if someone says you're not marketable, this, the social media landscape, again, telling a unique story. And from there, I decided that I was going to submit on a topic about failure, getting over failure.
Right.
And when I talked to the TEDx committee about being selected, it's like, you were the first person who openly talked about failure and in STEM and the challenges you face, and that's why they selected you. So when I'm saying about find your unique spot, understand what you're up against, as my parents say, find out what is unique, what you need to know. It is a proven formula. It works. You have to be unique. Steve Martin has a quote of, be so good they can't ignore you. Mm-hmm. You don't need to fight your way in, but if you're unique and they can't find anything else like you, much like the Dallas Morning News person found, much like the TEDx speakers committee talked about, and much like working at the Frontiers of Flight Museum, then made me win. Not necessarily, of course, my engineering degrees and having that background, but those unique qualifiers set me apart. And that's exactly what we all have to do.
Wow, love it. That is such a great story. Such a powerful story. Just the finding the article on Twitter, from LinkedIn, the Daily Morning News, the Mary Jackson character, and it all came from this person. Not all of it came from this person. Obviously, you had the fervor and the want and desire to craft this content in those articles, but the fact that someone actually told you that you are mid-career and you're not marketable, I mean, that literally just lit a fire. And it's so amazing. And I laugh about it, but I laugh about it with, not with detest, but I laugh about it with empowerment, because that is essentially what is the thread of what I'm trying to do. And what you have already been doing so great is that taking the virtues of who we are in this level of our careers. I mean, there's so much power in being mid-career, and you took it head on and you manifested it through the articles, through the speeches, and this article that I actually found doing my typical Gen X searches, because I am all in on this. This is my mission. This is my movement. So I'm always trying to see what is the narrative in the marketplace. And I found an article, and it was titled "Bridging the Gap: Why Gen X Leaders Are Critical to Success." And it was so great. And it was also quoting a lot of data, because I love data. I like to have things based in research from the great global leadership study that I also found through a couple other articles. And I actually got the study and I devoured it. And it's a great study by DDI. Can you just unpack a little bit, number one, why you decide to write that article? And number two, extend that conversation into just your overall thoughts about our role as Gen X in the workplace. You've already shed some lights, but if you can just really unpack the nuggets of that article.
Right. So it starts with this. So you never know who is in the room or who's watching when you should always operate in a spirit of excellence. So my journey to the Public Voices Fellowship, where I wrote this article, I was at an event and I was being honored for a STEM award. And someone in the audience who was a Public Voices Fellow saw me. I did not know the person. They reached out to me and say, "Hey, I saw you at the STEM event. You did great. I think you'd be perfect for this fellowship." Okay. So they advocated for me, and I did not know them. And you should never treat any event or situation as too small, because you never know who's watching. So I applied for the fellowship. And when I thought about op-eds, I thought op-eds were just your opinion. So when we really delve into the fellowship, and that's when they talked about how you have to have data to support your argument. And that fellowship really helped me define what it is. So I first started off talking about STEM. And of course, want to talk about leadership, but I had this burning desire after, I love, like, baby boomers. I absolutely have been, beneficial in my career. Millennials, I have nothing against them. They're great in powerhouses. I was like, where's the Gen X love? I was like, they keep talking about the baby boomers are leaving and millennials taking over. I'm like, okay, what about the Gen X? So I took a chance and I said, hey, I'm going to write this. I said, if it offends somebody, so be it. But there needs to be some positive light. And I said, well, how can I do it? I can talk about the connection. So when I talked to my mentor, they assign you a mentor in Public Voices. I said, I want to write about this. They said, oh, cool, absolutely. And I have to admit, there was some struggle getting it published. It was rejected quite a few times. And I was like, oh, nobody wants to hear this. I was like, should I even keep going? We kept going. And she was like, no, this is not in vain. You don't write anything in vain. We're going to find a place for this article. And so, yeah, it ended up in Garnet News, and it got a lot more views than I thought. It was even getting feedback from millennials and baby boomers. And like, I was like, oh, I thought we were just going to be like one or two people. And when you found it, and I was like, oh, okay. So I wrote it because I was just like, especially hearing from the person that I wasn't, mid-career, not marketable. And I was like, no, we are. And I just wanted to shed a light on how we are. And I know that, oftentimes, like, I've arrived at this executive level position, so I shouldn't talk about the past or the failures. But I don't want a person to think that I just arrived here and it was just smooth sailing, because it absolutely was not. So I just wanted to have something positive in a universe for Gen Xers. And I was like, whether one or two people read it, that so be it. But I just wanted to be a part of that positive conversation.
Well, I'm so glad you are a part of this conversation, and you're such a critical part of the conversation, because it can be challenging. I mean, you've already witnessed some of the initial hesitancy from people as far as it being not picked up because it's not the in vogue conversation of millennials and boomers. And what I love about your approach, Alicia, is it's very aligned with my approach, which I always articulate when I'm talking about kind of what I want to do with Gen X Amplified as a platform, as a movement. And the podcast is only one part of that. It's driven from a personal journey as a Gen Xer. It's driven from a gap in the marketplace. It's driven from what Gandhi likes to say, be the change you wish to seek in the world. And I too, like you, noticed that a lot of the narrative, even good and bad, it was still stuck in the narrative that we had back in the 90s of the slackers. And we've grown up since then, believe it or not. But what I always say is, I never approach this from a belittling or tearing down other generations. And a lot of times when you hear the chatter about millennials or boomers or people that call themselves quote unquote millennial experts, which is fine, there tends to be this, well, these boomers are doing this and these millennials, oh my God, they're so this. And every generation, every individual have their good and have their bad moments. What I'm trying to do is really amplify and build up the values and empower our generation, not tear down the others. And you can do that. And so when I hear what you're saying, because, in the opening of my show, a lot of times I say those brilliant boomers and those magnificent millennials. But now I'm trying to add in the conversation the exceptional Gen Xers. So I love the fact, even in the article, you do outline that. You talk about your personal journey. You talk about being a Generation X executive leader. And what's so great, your purview speaks from you actually working with these generations. Can you just talk about the power of, as your title says, bridging the gap, the power of Gen Xers being able to, I should say, bridge the gap in the workplace, so at the end of the day, the greater good for the company can be established?
Well, I will absolutely say, so I'm an only child.
Me too. I'm an only child.
Oh, awesome. High five. Virtual.
I am an only child. Yes.
So being a Gen X executive leader is the closest that I've felt to being the middle child ever. So like, you're caught in the middle where like, oh, these millennials, they're just trying to, take over. They don't know anything. They're too young. And then the millennials like, oh, you're just old. You're just not ready to new guy. And I'm like, hey, we all have, perspectives to take into consideration. We have to figure out, okay, what do you know that I don't know? What can I impart on you? And just having this constant communication, being able to say how you feel without being disrespectful. I took an improv class. And so when you're having conflict with someone, if you say yes and versus yes but, and I did not know how that changes the dynamic of a conversation until I witness it. So if you say yes, but, I'm not going to hear anything you're saying because you're like dismissing what I'm saying. So just having this constant communication, where you going? So I'm working in the museum. We have volunteers that are baby boomers. You know, I have 2 direct reports that are millennial managers, and then we have part-time educators, and then bringing into the mix that we have high school interns. So that's Generation Z, I think. So I had to approach leadership from different ways. So I had a executive mentor in HR and said, you know, you ask people what's going on? What can I help you with versus why did you do that? What is wrong with you? And just training yourself to be a good listener and just figuring out. And this is where my process background comes into play. So, okay, what would make that person do that? So what preceded that? You know, this is a response to what? Okay. And what role did I play in it? And it really helps for you to be introspective, which is hard. Because as Gen Xers, we're like, okay, I just want to get this done. And then an introvert is even more difficult. It's like, okay, didn't we talk about this yesterday? I thought we resolved it. And we have to go, okay, what was, miscommunicated? Okay, what are our goals? And so having these constant check-ins, and which is hard for me as an introvert because I'm like, I only want to have one conversation a day. But it's having these multiple conversations to get clarification, to see, what's going on, where's the disconnect. So it's really becoming a better listener and helping people to come up with asking the right questions so they can come up with proposed solutions versus just driving. Of course, you have your strategic goals and your organizational goals, but just helping people come to their own, solutions, because there'll be a time when you won't be able to be there, all hands on deck all the time. Right. So yeah, just being that good listener and asking the right questions. And that's where my engineering background comes in. What's the right questions to ask? And understanding that what didn't they say? Is the body language aligned with what they say? Do we have the emotional intelligence? And interesting enough, when I was still in corporate, when I didn't really know that I was going to be a leader, someone I knew was up for a promotion. And they said the feedback from the executive team is that they didn't have executive presence. That went over my head. I was like, executive presence? I'm never going to be executive, whatever. But we all have executive presence. Your how you communicate, how you perceive, the way you dress, the way you carry yourself, how do you build relationships? Do you have gravitas, this grace under fire? I mean, that is easier said than done. I mean, if I think about before I got laid off, I had a bad performance review. I talk about it in my TEDx talk. It was very traumatic. And it taught me something, though, as a leader in hindsight, because I would ask for feedback. The person wouldn't give it to me. So they decided to give it to me on the day of a performance review and write me up and give me a performance improvement plan. Whereas feedback as the incidents were occurring would help me be a better employee. And so as I'm leading, and then when it's performed, I was like, let me give people instant feedback. It doesn't no good to tell them a year later or when it's gotten really bad. Right. So that actually empowered me to be a better leader. Is that it's like, constantly tell people. And I can only improve if I know, if I'm aware. I get, even as an executive, I get failed at all times. And so it's my choice at how I perceive the feedback, and how can I improve? Let me address it. We're always, as a museum, we have tours and visitors. So people are going to go to social media and write, a good review or not a good review. And how do you address that? Crisis communications, crisis management. And so I absolutely know that those challenges I face in my performance review, having the, getting on a performance improvement plan, being laid off, being fired, working with multiple generations and multiple cultures is really, helped me. All those things helped me to be a better leader. I didn't know that at the time. At the time, it was like, oh my gosh, can another thing happen? But then it just lets you know that nothing is in vain.
Wow, nothing is in vain. You, in thinking about, you actually are on the ground working with these millennials, with these boomers. You're managing, you said on your team. I'm sure that you have your good days, you have your bad days, but you really highlighted some very important lessons when it comes to being a more effective leader as a mid-career executive, Gen X leader, being a good listener, which is very important. Asking the right questions, because there are a lot of questions that will be given to you. If you are to be a really effective leader, especially if you're managing people of a younger generation, you have to listen. You have to not only listen to them, but you have to listen to yourself. And I love, Alicia, that you really talked about that. And I know that came through also in the article, because toward the end, you mentioned as a generation leader, it's really important for you to have a strong sense of self-awareness and thinking about who you are. How can you better lead internally, but also how can you still navigate this professional landscape outside of work? And so just looking back and listening to your story, you have really, been behind the wheel and have seen roadblocks, you've seen open roads and pathways, and you've navigated some great journeys. And I know when I do meet fellow people that are passionate about really empowering our generation, it just really makes the hair on my arm stand up. Just thinking about your feedback, you mentioned when you wrote the article, Bridging the Gap, about Gen Xers, you said you got a lot of feedback from even boomers and millennials. The feedback, was it primarily positive, negative, a mixture? What was the type of feedback you were getting?
It was mostly, positive, because it was highlighting, what baby boomers want, what millennials want, and then the role that I, play in it. And you talk about, self-awareness. And for me, I talk about being an introvert, but I also had to become aware of the fact that I'm a processor. And, we talked about millennials wanting immediate feedback. So I'm processing information and what needs to be done. And so I had gotten feedback where it was like, well, you're not sharing. I was like, it's not that I'm trying to withhold information, but I'm trying to really figure out what's going on. I'll always be an engineer. I'm always analyzing. And before I deliver information to you, I want to make sure I absolutely understand it. And so that made me, aware of, sometimes how that can be perceived. Right. So I was like, it's not personable, but let me tell you about my personality type, because we're still learning each other. And so that is, you begin to understand how things can be misinterpreted. And so are you willing to take that feedback? And I'm absolutely the person, okay, what is it that we need to address, but how can we move forward? I don't want us to continue to going back and forth on something that we thought was resolved. So let's lay it all on the table and figure out how we can go forward.
No, that's great. And also just thinking about the lessons that you learned, and you referenced your TED Talk earlier. And I do remember that you were very candid about the performance review and the feedback that you received, and you really took that head on and talked about it. And it sounds like, you did mention that was one of the reasons why they did pick your talk to be part of TEDx, because you were very candid and you really talked about failure. And speaking of the TED Talk, that you did open with a song. Actually, this next question is all about a song. It's a question that I like to ask all my guests as we wind down, and it's a pretty fun one. So you ready?
Sure, I'm ready.
All right. So if there was a song that would play every time you open a door, enter a room, or walk down the street that matches your story and the brand of Alicia Morgan, what song would that be? What would be your own personal theme song?
This question was hard because I love music. But I'm going to probably go through half talking, half trying to sing this part because it'll bring it home. It's a song called Free Me, and it's by an artist called Josh Stone. And so it has an aerospace flying reference. So the first part of the lyrics I like, and if you find it hard to follow me, if I lose you in my jet stream, then you only got to raise your eyes and see me fly. Don't tell me that I won't, I can. Don't tell me that I'm not, I am. Don't tell me that my master plan ain't coming through. And then this is the other part I like. And if there's one thing I could say to you, is that there's nothing that you can't do, because it's all about your attitude. Don't let them get to you. And when we're singing in our own voice, we can make that choice to be free now. Free me. Free me now.
Wow. Oh, that was awesome. That was so great. See, that came out so natural. And I love some Josh Stone. Actually, I got hip to her back when I lived in New York. Great artist. And oh my God, Free Me, Josh Stone. Lyrically, I love that. That is your song. That is your brand song, right?
Absolutely. I knew that it was interesting because when I was still in corporate, even though I'm an introvert, and everybody was like, oh my gosh, you're so much happier now. I was like, oh my gosh, my acting sucked. I thought I was going to get an Academy Award for pretending that I loved corporate. But they were like, no, clearly we could see your whole demeanor has changed. And there was one last thing I want to say. There was a point last year where I was actually still contracting, and I was trying to figure out if, this STEM or this pathway to nonprofits was really for me. And it got to a low point where I was like, okay, I'm really not sustaining myself. I have these one-offs, and I was a mentor. I was like, don't give up. And I was on LinkedIn one night and I saw the job, the Vice President of Education Programs at Frontiers of Flight Museum. I was like, okay, here's my last shot. Otherwise, I think I may go back into corporate or oblivion. I don't know. So I applied to the job. And interesting enough, I had gone to the museum for the first time last March for a Women in STEM luncheon. Didn't occur to me I could work there. So I saw the job. And when I walked in to this, I approached sending my resume and submitting my cover letter differently. I decided to tell my story in the cover letter. So I walked in and I'm talking to the CEO. I was like, it just felt right. And then I had a group interview and it just felt right. And so then it all come into place. Because like I said, I was like, I don't know if I can keep doing this. This is like highly stressful trying to pursue this unpredictable path. But it all worked out, and you're like, you just got to keep going.
Well, it all worked out. You just got to keep going. Alicia, you just make sure you keep going, because I'm really inspired by your story. You are definitely a gem, a Gen X gem, and doing some amazing, exceptional things, especially in the area of STEM, which we need. We need more people. We need more African Americans. We need more Gen Xers. We just need more people in that field of the science, technology, engineering, and math. And the content that you've created, it's going to live forever. The legacies that you're building, the speeches, the articles, the being part of the movement, being part of this show, it's only going to enhance everyone. Millennial, Boomer, Xer, Z, plural. I just really am honored and proud that I'm able to have this conversation with you. Please let everyone know that's listening how they can just stay in contact with you, read your articles, and just the best way to just follow along your greatness.
Sure. So you can find me Alicia M. Morgan. There's so many Alicia Morgan, so I had to put the M in. Or you can actually hashtag search me AM Morgan on all platforms, whether it's Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you will find an article or video or some conversation to link with me. And I thank you so much for finding me. So that actually works. The hashtags work. So you found me from there. And it's an amazing platform you have. And I'm glad that you thought to put this together and keep it going. That's amazing. Shout out to you, and amazing for you're a great brand strategist. I saw that you were at HBO and all these great places. It's like, whoa, I got a new friend that does great and amazing things. So hope to stay connected with you.
Definitely will, Alicia. It's been awesome. Thank you so much. And I look forward to staying connected. And everyone, please follow her along. You will be great by doing so. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.
Yes, that was Alicia Morgan, a wonderful executive leader who is doing some amazing things within the STEM, or actually STEAM. Make sure we get the arts in there because she loves to write. She's very creative. The STEAM arena, and is also very passionate about advocating for mentorship, cultivating cross-generational relationships, and the importance of social capital as a leader. Love that conversation. So as always, thank you so much for listening to Gen X Amplify. Now remember to get the full show notes and catch up on the other episodes. Please go over to our website, genxamplified.com. And you can also find Gen X Amplified on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And make sure you catch up on the episodes. They're all there waiting for you to empower you in your earbuds. Again, I am your host, Adrion Porter, and you've been listening to Gen X Amplified, the podcast dedicated to you, the powerful and exceptional generation between the boomers and millennials. Remember, it's more than a podcast, it's a movement.